Hello, my name is Luther Hoyt, and I was erased while still breathing. They said it was just a mistake, that I didn't need to sit with the family at Brianna's memorial. But then came the white mourning band, the cropped wedding photo, the voice that never once said my name. They said I didn't belong in the boardroom, the garden, the story. They sold the legacy I helped build, rewrote the past while I sat silent until her voice came back to me through a letter no one expected. Now my daughter fights to bury me a second time, but what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried? Did she ever love me? Did I matter? Or was I just the scaffolding they were waiting to tear down? Let me show you what Brianna left behind, and why Danica might burn her own house down trying to keep it. The phone rang before the sun rose over Eugene. I was still in my flannel robe, the kind with a pocket too shallow for anything useful, standing in front of the stove waiting for the water to boil. I let the first 2 rings go, figured it was a robocall or one of those political surveys that start too early and end too late, but the 3rd ring sat in my chest like an old cough. I reached for it. "Luther Hale," I said, my voice rough from sleep and age. "Mr. Hale, it's Crawford Bellamy." The name slid through the line like a scalpel. "I'm calling regarding Brianna." I didn't need him to finish. Just hearing her name, her full name spoken like that, like a piece of unfinished business, told me everything. My grip on the receiver slackened, and I had to press it hard against my ear to keep from dropping it. "She passed late last night," Crawford continued. "Peacefully. Her daughter was with her. Danica, of course." "I'm sorry," he added. "So was I, but not in the way he thought. I didn't ask for details. And I didn't want them. It wasn't the cancer or the timeline that mattered. It was the fact that someone else had closed the door on her story, and I wasn't even in the room. I thanked him, or at least I think I did. After I hung up, I stood still long enough for the kettle to screech at me in protest. I didn't move until the smell of something burning pulled me back. I reached for the mug on the counter, the blue and white porcelain one with the faded sailboat, and missed. My fingers, slick with nothing but time and trembling, barely brushed the handle before it tumbled to the floor. It hit the linoleum with a sound that split the quiet like lightning. The pieces scattered like a memory dropped too hard. It had a crack already. That cup had for years, a hairline fracture from the time Brianna and I moved into the little house on Maple Street. I'd knocked it against the sink while doing dishes. She said, "Don't throw it out." It still works. I kept it, of course. Like everything else we didn't fix. Now it was shards and dusts, and I was too tired to sweep, so I got on my knees anyway, because that's what you do when things break. You clean them up, even when no one's watching. There was a time, 12 years back, when Brianna was in the hospital for pneumonia. Nothing dire, but enough to scare me into a 3-hour soup recipe. I brought it in a thermos, too hot to serve immediately, so I waited. She scrolled through emails, the IV in her arm tapping the rhythm of hurry up and wait. She took the soup. She didn't say thank you, and I didn't ask for one. I watched her sip. I watched her breathe. We were already ghosts in each other's story by then. But the hospital TV was too loud, and her socks didn't match. And I remembered thinking, some part of her was still the girl who used to sit barefoot in our kitchen eating cereal at midnight, insisting the world was fixable. Maybe I believed it, too. The phone rang again, and I nearly let it go to voicemail, but I didn't. "Hi, Dad?" Danica's voice was soft, measured, like someone diffusing a bomb they weren't sure how to disable. "I heard," I said. "I figured Crawford would call." There was a long pause, like we were both waiting for the other to say something honest. I wanted to say, "You don't have to come to the service." I stayed silent. "It's just, you know how things were, and it'll be a small gathering." "I see." "It's not that I don't—" She stopped, regrouped. "I just thought maybe it would be easier, for everyone." "Sure," I said. "I'll think about it." But we both knew what that meant. The dining room hadn't changed in decades. Same oak table, same yellow light bulb in the overhead fixture, casting everything in a shade of not quite real. I sat down in the same chair I'd used to write checks, to open mail, to pretend I wasn't waiting for something that would never arrive. The suit was still in the closet, wrapped in dry cleaner's plastic from the last funeral I attended, my brother's. I hadn't unwrapped it since. Didn't see the point. Now I did. I opened the closet, took the suit off the hanger. It still smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender, the ghost of Sunday mornings past. I laid it on the bed and stared at it. The pieces of the broken mug were still on the counter. I didn't sweep them into the trash. I couldn't. Instead, I got the old wooden box from the hall closet, the one lined with velvet I once used to store letters I never sent. I placed each shard carefully inside, a cracked handle, a jagged piece with the sailboat still visible. I closed the lid. Not grief, not yet, just a shift, like the ground was deciding whether or not to quake. I tried on the suit. The sleeves were a little tighter. The pants hung looser than I remembered. I looked at myself in the mirror, unsure of the man staring back. But he looked sure, and he was going. The suit fit tighter than I remembered, but not so much that I couldn't fasten the buttons. I ran my hand over the lapels, smoothing fabric that had waited too long for use. By the time I stepped outside, the morning light was flat and gray, softening everything it touched. I made the drive without the radio. Some days, silence felt more honest. St. Arlene Chapel sat like a monument to better days. White bricks and 2 clean windows. The parking lot was full of sleek cars, shiny, least confidence. I parked in the back, out of habit more than necessity. Walking up the hill toward the entrance, I passed a woman I hadn't seen since Brianna's retirement dinner. She glanced at me, then quickly turned away, pretending to check her phone. Another man, someone from the board, I think, nodded vaguely in my direction but didn't slow his steps. Familiar faces, all suddenly shy. I straightened my back. If they were going to ignore me, they could at least see me standing. Inside, everything smelled like lilies and wax, the kind of scent that never felt like morning, just preparation. At the entrance, a young staffer approached with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me a white mourning band. I slipped it onto my sleeve without a word, but before I could take more than 3 steps, a woman with a clipboard leaned in and whispered something to him. "Excuse me, Mr. Hoyt," he said, voice suddenly formal. "I'm sorry. That section is reserved for family only." He reached gently for the band and removed it, folding it like I might ask to keep it. I didn't argue, didn't ask who decided what counted as family today. I just nodded, turned, and followed where he pointed, toward a folding chair near the emergency exit, back row, the kind of seat they give to distant cousins or late arrivals. I sat down slowly, making sure the creak of the metal chair wasn't louder than my dignity. From that angle, I couldn't even see the altar straight on. I tilted my head slightly and saw Danica, radiant in black, greeting guests with an ease I didn't know she had. Her smile was rehearsed but convincing. She hugged a man with gray temples, laughed softly with someone from her mother's charity board. The crowd parted for her like she was gravity itself. I rested my hands on my knees and watched, not with bitterness, with something heavier. This was her show now. At the front of the chapel hung a massive photo of Brianna, one I recognized instantly. It was taken at our wedding, or rather, edited from it. We had been standing on a dock in Newport, her in ivory, me in a gray suit, the wind trying to carry off her veil. But this version, it was cropped. Only she remained. The dock extended, but no trace of my arm around her waist. It looked natural. Unless you knew what was missing, I did. I stared at the image, trying to remember if I still owned the suit I'd worn that day. I wasn't sure. It might have been given away, lost in a move, or tucked in a box somewhere under years of dust and forgetfulness. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they just didn't care. Behind me, 2 voices whispered. Women, maybe mid-50s, the kind who wear too much perfume and always seem to know everything. "Is that her ex?" one said. "Surprised he had the nerve to show up," the other replied. I didn't turn. I didn't react. My fingers tightened slightly, but not enough to be seen, not enough to give them the satisfaction of being right. You get used to disappearing by degrees, first from holidays, then from conversations, Then from photographs. It doesn't hurt less. It just becomes familiar. I adjusted my tie and stared ahead. Danica stepped onto the podium. She didn't look at her notes. She looked at me, and I couldn't tell. Not then, whether she was deciding to honor me or erase me entirely. Danica stood at the podium like she'd rehearsed every breath, her shoulders square, voice steady, not a tremble in sight. The chapel hushed the moment she opened her mouth. People leaned in, expectant, ready to feel moved, to be reminded of the woman they all believed they knew. My mother, she began, was the kind of woman who didn't ask for permission. She built her life, her business, her legacy, with her own hands. The crowd nodded. A few murmured soft approvals. One man clapped lightly, prompting a ripple of applause. I sat still, hands resting on my knees, my face giving nothing away. She taught me how to lead, how to stand tall in rooms that weren't built for us. Everything she created, she did on her own. The sentence dropped like a gavel, not loud, but final. No mention of the long nights I held Brianna's head while she wept over payroll errors, of the times I covered bills to keep the lights on at the start, or the way I'd built her first conference booth by hand in our garage. Nothing. Not a flicker of shared history. I watched Danica pause to let the words settle, then smile, polished, perfect, as if she had just granted the crowd a small truth they already suspected. She had help from mentors, from colleagues, from those who stood beside her. The list followed, names I recognized, some I didn't. Former partners, employees, one of her college professors. Each name landed like a drop of water on stone. Mine never came. And yet, it wasn't the omission that bruised. It was how natural it felt, how the silence wrapped itself around me like an old coat, as if I had never been expected to exist in this version of her life. I adjusted my tie and stared ahead, jaw still, breath even. Behind me, someone whispered, "She always was a force of her own." Yes, but I had been the wind behind her sails, once. Now I was the dock she unmoored from. 15 years earlier, I'd gone digging through the upstairs closet, trying to find the winter gloves I'd stashed behind the coats. I hadn't expected to find the shoebox. It was wedged behind a stack of sweaters I'd forgotten we even owned. I opened it without thinking. Inside was Brianna's wedding ring, the one I'd placed on her hand the day we said forever in front of 30 friends, a few relatives, and a preacher who cried harder than we did. She hadn't taken it with her when she left, and she hadn't told me she'd kept it. I didn't mention it, just slid the box back, closed the closet, and stood there for a long minute listening to the house breathe. That night, I took the ring out again and placed it into a smaller box. I never wore it, never touched it again, but I didn't throw it away. And when Danica said what she said, when she wrote me out with such precision, my hand found its way to my pocket, where the outline of that same box still rested. The ring still fit my palm like it had the first time. The service ended with another round of polite applause. I waited for the aisle to clear before I stood. Outside, the sky was pale and indifferent. The courtyard buzzed with movement, people in charcoal suits, black dresses, heels clicking against brick, arms wrapped around condolence and social performance. Some took photos, others laughed. The grief had already been rinsed down to something manageable. I stepped to the edge of the scene and inhaled slowly. The wind carried the faintest trace of lilies, or maybe old perfume. A man brushed past me, nodding politely. Someone else offered a curt smile, then moved on. I had been in their lives once, and now I was just a figure in a suit, standing too close to the edge. She walked up from my left, quiet as memory. "Mr. Hoyt," she said. "Luther." I turned. Lenore Duval. She'd been our housekeeper in the late years, more like a distant cousin who knew when to retreat. Practical to a fault. Never overstayed her welcome. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. "I kept something," she said, her voice low. "Didn't think I would, but I did." She handed me a small velvet box. I found it in the laundry room before she moved out. She never asked for it back. I figured. Maybe she couldn't. My hands closed around it gently. I'm sorry, Lenore added. She didn't forget everything, and then she disappeared into the crowd before I could say thank you. I stood alone under a tree near the far wall. The box fit neatly into my hand, smaller than I remembered, but heavier now. I opened it slowly, as if the air around me might shatter. Inside was her ring, the one I'd seen in the shoebox, still intact, still catching the light the same way it did the day I bought it. She had kept it. If that speech erased me, this little circle of gold remembered everything. The chairs were nearly empty before I stood. People filtered out of the chapel in pairs, some clasping programs, others whispering comments that died before they hit the spring air. I waited until the last person left the row before I moved, slow, deliberate. The aisle felt longer on the way out. Outside, sunlight draped the courtyard like a too-warm sweater. A canopy tent had been set up over a buffet table, surrounded by clusters of mourners holding plastic flutes of sparkling cider. Someone had arranged mini sandwiches into neat triangles. A few guests already balanced plates on their knees, seated on folding chairs too low for dignity. I made my way across the grass, not quickly, but I came anyway. She still deserved my presence, even if nobody wanted it. I paused near the edge of the reception space, unsure whether to approach or fade. Then I heard it, low murmurs, the subtle cadence of digital gossip. You saw Danica's post? A man nearby tilted his phone. A woman leaned in, eyebrows arched. She never needed a man to build her empire. I'm proud to continue that legacy. Just posted it. Tagged the foundation, the board, even Brianna's old assistant. They chuckled, polite, disbelieving, approving. It didn't matter. I didn't need to see it. The words floated between them like perfumed smoke. She never needed a man. I stood there long enough to feel the air thicken. The sentence didn't shock me. It confirmed something already etched into the day's events. If the speech inside was the chisel, this post was the final hammer tap. I turned slightly, gaze landing on the center circle near the reception canopy. Danica stood surrounded by 4 men and 2 women, board members, by the cut of their suits and the slick confidence in their posture. One held a portrait of Brianna. Another gestured toward the camera crew. Flashbulbs popped. Legacy shots. I watched her laugh. She glanced over her shoulder once, right past me. I stepped forward, not sure why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe just to say something kind, something simple. Before I could speak, she turned. Not now. Dad. The words were soft, but they landed with precision. This is for legacy shots. And just like that, I became something in the background again, a stray branch in the frame to be cropped later. I nodded, barely, and turned away. But she wasn't done. Wait. She motioned to someone nearby and pulled me toward the edge of the tent, behind a column wrapped in ivy. I don't know why you came, she said, low but sharp. You got what you wanted. You were seen. I met her eyes. Was that what this was about for you? She didn't blink. You think she owed you something? A mention? A line in a speech? I stayed quiet. She left you nothing, Danica said. And don't expect anything at the reading either. I absorbed it like rain through old cloth, slow and soaking. She looked over her shoulder, making sure no one watched. You don't belong here, Dad. You haven't for a long time. Then she walked away, shoulders high, as if she'd just taken out the trash. I stood in place a moment longer, then wandered back toward the buffet, not for food, but to find somewhere to sit. There was a glass-topped table near the edge of the lawn. Guests sat in groups of 4, their laughter punctuated by the clink of cutlery. I sat alone, staring into the mirrored surface, my reflection fractured by half-filled wine glasses, paper napkins, and the back of a chair. They laughed. I watched. I wasn't grieving wrong. I just didn't belong in their version of mourning. Someone bumped my elbow, murmured an apology. I nodded without turning. Then a voice behind me said, "Mr. Hoyt?" I turned. A man in a tailored navy suit stood there, hands folded neatly. Mr. Crawford Bellamy would like a word, privately. I stood without asking. When a lawyer wants to speak alone, it's never just pleasantries. Crawford Bellamy appeared without warning. 1 second, I was watching the crowd cluster around the dessert table, and the next, his hand was on my elbow, light but purposeful. "Mr. Hoyt," he said, voice low. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded, following him a few paces away from the others. We stopped behind a column wrapped in faux ivy, far enough from the catering tent that no one could overhear without trying. He reached into his inside coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope, thick and sealed with a silver crest. "This is for you," he said, pressing it gently into my hand. "Formal invitation to the will reading." I looked at it, then at him. "Is this... why now?" "It's not optional," Crawford said. "You're specifically named. I'd advise you to attend." I didn't respond right away. My fingers curled around the envelope. Its weight felt disproportionate for its size. A name, my name, still inside something official, still spoken out loud by someone who knew better than to pretend otherwise. I thanked him quietly. The air shifted before I noticed the shadow. Danica stood 10 feet away, arms crossed. She'd seen everything. Her heels clicked sharply as she closed the distance. "Crawford," she said coolly. He nodded once. "Danica." Then he turned and left me there to absorb the fallout. "You don't belong in that room," she said. Apparently, someone thought otherwise. Her eyes narrowed. "It's a courtesy," she said. "A formality. Don't read into it." I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket. "You always did underestimate what counts as reading." That got her. She hesitated a second too long, then turned away, brisk, tight-lipped. I didn't move. The chill in her wake was sharper than the afternoon breeze. It wasn't until the crowd began thinning that I started walking again, slowly toward the sidewalk where cars waited to take the last of them away. As I passed the parking lot curb, I caught sight of a familiar face near the back of a black SUV. Jonah, my grandson. He was taller now, thinner, leaning against the door, phone in one hand, his head lifted for a moment, eyes catching mine, but it lasted less than a second. His gaze darted away. He turned his back and pretended to scroll. That quick, that simple. I kept walking. Some hurts don't need words. Silence runs in the blood. The bus ride home was quiet. A woman in the front seat clutched a bouquet wrapped in cellophane. I stared out the window, the envelope still in my coat pocket, thumb brushing its edge every few blocks. Back inside the house, the late light slid across the floor like liquid amber. I hung my coat, kicked off my shoes, and set the envelope on the kitchen counter. Next to it, I placed the small velvet box, the one with Brianna's ring. They sat side by side, one containing a piece of past I'd never reclaimed, the other a future I wasn't sure I trusted. I stood there a long while, watching them like they might move. Go and prove them wrong, I whispered to the empty room, or stay quiet and disappear. I didn't answer myself, not yet. Later that evening, I opened the bedroom closet and reached for the suit. Same one I'd worn to the funeral. Same one I hadn't worn in years before that. I laid it on the bed, smoothed the shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of old church wood and the starch of solemnity. I checked the buttons, then the hem. Still intact, still mine. This time, it wasn't for grieving. I sat down in the corner chair, staring at the folds of cloth. The suit waited, like it understood what was coming next. She left me nothing, huh? I didn't say it bitterly. I said it like a dare. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and picked up the envelope again. Let's see if the paper agrees. I hadn't stepped into that building in over 20 years. Morrison. Welsh associates occupied a restored Victorian home with ivy curling up the railings like it was trying to take the place back. The brass plaque by the door shone too bright for the gloom I carried in. Inside, polished dark wood lined the walls. The floor creaked with the kind of authority that reminded you where you were. Old money. Old decisions. Danica was already there. She sat at the far end of the long conference table, legs crossed, phone in hand, but not moving. Her coat hung perfectly from the chair behind her, and the way her arms tightened across her chest told me she'd been rehearsing this moment. She didn't say hello. Crawford Bellamy entered with a leather folder under his arm, nodding briefly before taking the head seat. Behind him, two junior associates sat quietly, one scribbling in a yellow notepad, the other with a laptop open and already recording. "No need for pleasantries," Crawford said. "We'll begin." He opened the folder slowly, as though each hinge was timed. "I, Brianna Elspeth Hoyt, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this as my last will and testament." Danica didn't flinch. Not yet. The words rolled on, legal, dry, surgical. Then came the first incision. "To my daughter, Danica Hoyt." She sat straighter. "I leave primary control of Hoyt Communications, LLC, all associated equity, and a financial disbursement in the amount of $2 million. She exhaled, shoulders dropping. "Contingent upon her remaining chief executive officer for a period not less than 24 months following the execution of this will, and further maintaining the integrity and public image of the Hoyt brand during that period." There was a pause. Small, measured. Danica didn't move at first, then blinked once. Slowly, her left hand twitched. The only tell. Crawford looked up briefly. "Clause 3.5 stipulates a revocation of inheritance in the event of voluntary resignation, scandal, or brand compromise." Danica's lips parted slightly, then pressed together like she'd tasted something bitter. "She knew I wanted out," she hissed, not caring that everyone could hear. I kept my eyes on the leather grain of the table. She wasn't chosen, I thought. She was cornered. Across the glossy wood, our reflection wavered, hers rigid, mine calm. A silent chessboard, each move unspoken but known. Crawford continued, voice a metronome. Behind him, the laptop keys clicked rhythmically. From the back corner, a whisper pierced the formality. Wasn't he the one who, when she had that breakdown? It was the younger assistant, leaning into her colleague, voice low, but not low enough. My body didn't move, not a flinch. But inside, something coiled tight. The phrase hovered like smoke. I'd heard rumors before, whispers that twisted grief into fable, pain into fiction. A lie left unchallenged becomes a story becomes the truth. I stared straight ahead. Crawford closed the folder briefly. "There are additional clauses," he said, tone shifting, "and beneficiaries beyond the immediate family." The air thinned. Danica straightened like a diver anticipating the surface breaking. The younger assistant stopped typing. Even the walls seemed to listen. Crawford looked directly at me. "Mr. Hoyt, you'll want to listen very closely to this next part." He opened the folder again, slower this time. "This isn't just about money, it's about who gets remembered." Crawford cleared his throat again, a deliberate pause. The room, already silent, took on a sharper stillness, like air before a storm. "To my former husband, Luther Hoyt." Danica's spine went stiff. Her head turned so quickly toward me that her earrings swayed. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "I leave the property at Dexter Lake, the controlling 65% share of Hoyt Communications, and liquid personal assets totaling $33.5 million. A soft gasp echoed from the junior associate. One of the windows rattled, though the street outside was still. Danica's lips parted. No sound. My heart did not race. My breath remained slow. But inside, something cracked. Not with anger or disbelief, but a question that echoed in my gut. Did she forgive me? Or did she trust me more than she trusted our daughter? The air buzzed without sound. Then Danica stood. "This is a lie," she shouted, voice trembling at first, then gaining edge. "This is manipulation. He poisoned her memory. Everyone here knows it." Crawford didn't blink. The will was revised 2 months prior to Mrs. Hoyt's passing, witnessed, notarized, and certified by 2 physicians as completed in full mental competence. "She was sick," Danica barked. "She was vulnerable. This This is elder coercion. No such claim was filed or documented, he said, voice like glass. There were no signs of undue influence. I stayed seated, not out of fear, but because I knew this wasn't the time to defend. If I spoke, I'd look guilty. If I answered, I'd betray the only moment of grace Brianna had left me. So I sat there, watching my daughter shatter in front of strangers. Behind my eyes, I saw the ring box, the porch we never rebuilt, the morning light she used to hum beneath. A memory, not a defense. Crawford didn't flinch. Instead, he slid a manila folder across the polished table toward me. This contains the company's transition instructions and a letter from Mrs. Flores, outlining her reasoning. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Danica stood rigid, jaw trembling, but her voice had gone somewhere she couldn't retrieve. Then, as if the table no longer existed, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. "This isn't over!" She threw behind her like a knife. Crawford didn't watch her leave. He simply looked at me. "I'll need you to sign here," he said, tapping the folder gently, "unless you plan to refuse." And for the first time, I considered saying no. Crawford didn't speak right away. He turned slowly in his chair, reached behind into the drawer of the credenza, and withdrew a pale blue envelope, unsealed but heavy. "Mrs. Flores left a personal message," he said. "It's addressed to you, Mr. Hoyt." The envelope rested in his palm, untouched. Every person in the room stopped breathing for a beat. Then Danica stood. "You can't let him read that." Her voice cracked. "She was dying. He got to her. He turned her against us." Crawford remained calm, the envelope still untouched. "This message is legally protected. It was recorded and filed under mental competence review, witnessed by 2 neutral parties." Danica took a step forward, chest heaving. "She wasn't herself." "She was clear," Crawford said. "On every word." He unfolded the letter carefully, and I braced myself. Not with tension, but the kind of dread that only comes when something sacred is about to speak from the grave. Crawford cleared his throat once more, then read aloud. "Jerry, yes, I'm using your real name, because you were always more than the titles we threw at each other. You deserved better than my pride. I see that now. I've had years to revisit our beginning, and I've spent too many of them pretending that the version I painted was the only truth. But you were the one who tried to save us. I was the one who chose the world." I felt my chest hollow. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like stepping into a room I used to live in and realizing it still smelled like me. Crawford continued. "I watched you from afar, even after we stopped speaking. I saw you show up for every milestone, even when no one wanted you there. I watched you eat silence like bread. I never told our daughter the full story. I was too proud, and I fear she's inherited more than my ambition." The words hung like salt in an open wound. Danica didn't speak, not yet. Then came the line, "You were never small, Jerry. You were steady. You were the one who stood still when everything else crumbled." Danica erupted. "She's not here to explain herself. This is manipulation." She stormed across the room, grabbed the letter from Crawford's hand. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might tear it in half, but she didn't. Her fingers trembled, her eyes darted across the page. Then she dropped it gently onto the table and stepped back. The cracks in her fury were visible now, not fractures of hate, but confusion. Crawford picked the letter back up and read the final lines. "If you're reading this, it means you were named, and you probably didn't ask for any of this. But I'm asking now, protect the heart of what we built. Don't let the title ruin the roots. And forgive her too, if you can. She loved you, in the only way I taught her how." Crawford lowered the page. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe, not deeply, but differently. Danica's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm contesting everything." Crawford folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope. "You can try," he said quietly. "But your mother was always precise." I stood slowly. the chair sliding back with the slightest creak, and I looked at Danica, not with anger, but with something older, heavier. It's not me she's fighting anymore. I sat at my kitchen table, the light outside slanting orange against the blinds. The envelope, the folder, and the ring lay in a line before me. 3 artifacts from a life I thought had already ended. I hadn't changed clothes since the reading. The stiffness in my back reminded me I'd spent the last hour just sitting there, trying to name the emotion that refused to form. Grief was too soft, vindication too dishonest. It was like standing on soil that had just begun to crack, hearing it before feeling the fall. A knock broke the silence. I opened the door to find Kenton Wiles. We hadn't spoken in a decade. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were still the sharp blue of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. "I couldn't say anything earlier," he said, not waiting to be invited in. "But you should know, she never blamed you." I said nothing, but stepped aside. He walked in like he'd been here before, back when Brianna still came over for Christmas dinners. He stopped near the table and looked at the objects laid out. "It wasn't you," he said again, softer this time. He took a breath, then pulled a worn notebook from inside his coat. "She asked me to hold on to this, just in case." It was thin, the spine creased, the pages beginning to yellow. I took it from him, slowly, as if it might dissolve. On the inside cover, in Brianna's steady handwriting, was one phrase: "Contingencies, in case of clarity." The first line hit like a slap. If Danica ever forgets why we started, remind her. I flipped through, notes scrawled in margins, fragments of thoughts. But clear patterns emerged. "She's driven," one entry read, "but not the kind that builds, the kind that consumes." Another page: "Legacy means nothing if it becomes a performance." And then, circled in red ink, "If Luther is still standing, he still deserves." I set the notebook down. Kenton hadn't moved. She started writing it after her first collapse. Said she didn't want Danica to rewrite the whole house without checking the foundation. We didn't speak for a long while. Then Kenton said, "She wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid of being misunderstood." I nodded once. Across town, in a boardroom lined with glass and tension, Danica was unraveling. Her voice echoed off sleek walls as she barked at her assistant. "Tell them the terms are being misread." The assistant, young and unsure, stammered, Some people are asking about the letter and the notebook. It's been seen." Danica's voice sliced through the air. "Then lie better." She turned to her laptop, scrolling through the company's internal chat. Dozens of messages blinked in bold. Did Brianna really intend this? Was she coerced? Why now? Her hand, once poised and powerful, now trembled. She stood abruptly, knocking over a glass of water. Then she stared at the mess, silent. Back in my apartment, I closed the notebook slowly, as if putting a child to bed. She wasn't just talking to me in that letter, I whispered. She was warning all of us. I reached for my phone, opened the voice memo app. The red dot blinked once. Then I spoke. I sat at my kitchen table again. Same worn wood, same low hum from the refrigerator. The only sound was my own breath as I tapped record on the phone. My voice felt like it came from someone I hadn't fully met yet. "I'm not speaking to clear my name," I said slowly. "Not anymore. This is for the record, so history can breathe correctly." I spoke about Brianna's ambition, her brilliance, and the quiet void she left behind. I admitted my failings, the silences that did damage, and the love I never stopped holding. Then I said the line I hadn't rehearsed. Danica didn't inherit my silence. She practiced it. I stopped recording. The screen blinked. I named the file. Legacy, unedited. Across town, in the marble-paneled offices of Flores Consulting, another file had just surfaced. Albie, a junior staffer with a reputation for discretion, had anonymously uploaded a redacted voice memo to the company's ethics channel. It had been trimmed awkwardly, ending right after a whisper. "Leave it all to..." The cut was obvious, intentional. And it wasn't Brianna's voice that raised suspicion. It was Danica's voice layered faintly in the background, mid-interruption. Speculation ran faster than servers could hold it. Hallways buzzed. Slack channels overflowed. The memo was real and incomplete. By noon, Danica had summoned the board. She stood at the head of the long table, all silver accents and navy pantsuit, and announced, "Flores will transition to DL Enterprises within the quarter." She paused, waiting for applause. None came. Board member Julian Winfield leaned forward. Clause 14B. Miss Flores, you cannot alter the company's name or branding for 3 years, per your mother's will. Danica blinked. That clause was under review. Crawford's voice, disembodied from a speaker, cut in. It was reviewed, by Brianna. Personally, signed and notarized. Julian smiled thinly. Looks like you thought you had more time. Danica clenched the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. An hour later, another file appeared. This one wasn't anonymous. Albie's name was right there in the submission metadata. The email chain laid it bare. Danica had instructed legal staff to streamline the presentation of the will, asking for certain phrasing to be softened before printing. It wasn't full-on forgery, but it was manipulation. Danica fired him on the spot. The legal team didn't cheer. They didn't even nod. One quietly began checking the document logs. And back at my place, I wasn't celebrating. The message on my voicemail came late in the afternoon. Marin. Her voice was tentative but clear. Hi, Grandpa. I think I understand more now. I'm sorry it took this long. I listened to it twice. Then a third time. I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the porch and watched the day lean into dusk. The phone rang again. This time, it was Crawford. They want you to speak at the investor meeting tomorrow, he said. It's not a request. I exhaled, slow and deep, and put the phone down gently. It was never about owning the company, but maybe it's time I finally claimed my part in it. I stepped into the boardroom, glass walls, projection screens, and morning sunlight slicing through silence. I was the oldest person there, by at least 30 years. A few young executives looked up, expecting someone else entirely. Crawford rose. Mr. Hoyt will deliver the transition statement. I caught a smirk from someone near the back. They expected a relic. Maybe they weren't wrong. I stood without notes. I won't speak long, I said. Legacy isn't about control. It's about care. I let that hang in the air. My silence wasn't weakness. It was respect for what she built and for who she became. The room shifted. Phones were pocketed. Not a whisper. They weren't listening because they feared me. They listened because it mattered. Midway through, the door opened sharply. Danica entered, heels clipped across marble. She wasn't late by accident. So this is how leadership transitions now? She said. Arms folded. I turned to her. You were given a legacy. I was handed responsibility. No one intervened. The room froze, quiet, calculating. Then came the offer. Mr. Hoyt, the board chair said, would you consider acting as interim chair during the audit? I shook my head once. If I lead, it won't be by title. Instead, I propose something else. A governance board, made up of people who've lived this company. Lenore, Kenton. Let's make decisions rooted in memory, not margins. Some nodded, one clapped. Softly. Later, in the hallway, she caught up to me. I don't understand, Danica said, no longer sharp. What was all this for, if not to win? I wasn't here to win, I replied. Then what? To make sure what your mother died for wasn't reduced to a spreadsheet. She said nothing. Her eyes shimmered, but the tears didn't fall. I turned to leave. As I stepped outside, sunlight caught the gray on my coat sleeve. My phone buzzed. Marin. I've been reading her notebook, the message read, and I thought, maybe it's time we let the truth run the business. The memory of the boardroom still lingered, the glass walls, Danica's fury, Marin's quiet text. That afternoon, Marin came by my front porch. The porch light flickered just as she appeared, notebook in hand. She said, "She wrote more than you think." Marin settled on an old rocking chair and opened the cover. She read softly, "Danica will always fight for power, but love doesn't fight like that." I felt the words settle into my chest. She looked up, solemn but hopeful. "She wasn't just warning you," Marin said. "She meant all of us." As the sun dipped lower, Marin stayed long enough to sip tea and share another passage, then left quietly. I kept the notebook beside the ring box, relics of a life tangled in memory. That evening, I visited Danica's office. I walked in knowing she would be alone. The framed photo of her mother lay on her desk, the glass smashed, frame fallen sideways, paper scattered. Her desk lamp was turned off, only the screen glowed dimly. I stood in the doorway. She didn't look up. I could see her replaying that voice note again and again. Brianna's words clipped in public, but raw in private, lip-syncing, staring at the ghost of her daughter's voice. I cleared my throat. She turned slowly. Tears glistened before shame hardened her face. Without speaking, I stepped forward and placed a folder on her desk. Crawford had typed it up. Instructions. My clear, deliberate plan. Transfer majority shares into a trust governed by the ethical board and employees named in Brianna's writing. Lenore, Kenton, Marin. I'd drafted it so Danica wouldn't have to do what she couldn't. My voice was steady. Let them carry it forward. Not me, not her, not the past. Crawford's note. It would be contested. He'd warned. I met his gaze. Then let them try, I said. Danica's face shifted, cracking at the edges. She wanted to fling back a reply, but nothing came. Instead, she gathered the envelope. I left without looking back. Later, I found her by the company garden, sitting on a quiet bench, not dressed for conflict, her coat tossed loosely over her shoulders, shoes barely polished. I approached with caution. "I wanted to burn it all," she said, voice brittle. I sat beside her. "You tried," I replied gently, "but what mattered wouldn't catch." I reached into that folder and offered her a letter she'd never opened. Brianna's final words meant for Danica. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. She read, tears falling now, not only for her mother, but for everything broken between us. I said nothing, just waited for her to finish. Morning came transformed. In the courtyard of Flora's Consulting, new signage went up. Flora's Foundation Initiative, employees, former colleagues, and a few board members gathered under a spring sky. Marin stood at a small podium, holding the notebook to her chest. She spoke of ethics, memory, and service, her voice steady, going beyond any family quarrel into something lasting. I stayed in the crowd's back, unnoticed. I didn't need applause. I watched Marin, glowing with resolve. I thought of Brianna, of love that didn't fight to win but to endure. One voice in that crowd whispered to another, "Sometimes the best revenge is making sure the truth survives you." I nodded, quietly to myself. That evening, on my porch again, I placed the cracked porcelain cup, a symbol from Brianna's earliest startup days, on the mantel above the fireplace. The flickering light caught its imperfections and turned them into patterns of strength rather than shame. I whispered, "She tried to break me, but all she did was show me how strong I'd always been." And as the breeze passed through, I felt the legacy shift, not erased, carried on by those who remembered the roots. And when you build something that can't be erased, that's the only kind of forever worth leaving behind.